What if this suitcase hides the secret you've been hiding from everyone? The air in Grandma Eleanor's old colonial house in suburban Columbus, Ohio, still carried the faint scent of lilies from the funeral arrangements, but the mood had soured the moment the last mourner left. Kenneth stood near the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching the chaos unfold like a storm he had no power to stop. Aunt Linda's shrill voice cut through the room first. "That antique clock has been in the family for generations. It belongs on my mantle, not yours, Bob." Uncle Bob slammed his hand on the dining table, rattling the silverware. "You already took the china last year. The desk is mine. Eleanor promised it to me before she got sick." Cousin Mark laughed bitterly from the corner, scrolling through his phone while his wife scooped up a crystal vase. "You people are ridiculous. The jewelry goes to me. Grandma always said I was her favorite grandson." Kenneth's father, Richard, tried to play peacemaker, but even he kept glancing at the walnut sideboard with hungry eyes. No one looked at Kenneth. He was the 28-year-old graphic designer from Chicago who showed up alone again, the one who smiled politely, changed the subject whenever anyone asked about a girlfriend, and quietly paid his respects. The invisible grandson, the lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, finally cleared his throat and read the last clause of the will in a flat, tired voice. "To my dear grandson Kenneth, I leave the old brown suitcase stored in the attic. It has traveled with me through many chapters, and I trust it will guide him through his own." A beat of silence. Then the room exploded with laughter. "A suitcase?" Aunt Linda snorted. "That dusty thing from the 50s? She must have been confused at the end." Uncle Bob shook his head. "Kid gets the junk while we split the real assets." Typical. Kenneth felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, climbed the creaky stairs alone, and pulled the suitcase from under a pile of old quilts. It was heavier than it looked. When he clicked the latches open in the dim attic light, the smell of lavender sachets and old paper washed over him. Inside lay a one-way plane ticket to New York City, departure in 2 weeks, and a sealed envelope in Grandma Eleanor's familiar shaky script. He sat on an old trunk and tore it open. The letter began without preamble. "My sweet boy, I have known since you were 16, and I found that magazine under your bed. I never breathed a word to anyone, not even your father. You are not broken. You are not wrong. This ticket is my last gift. Go. Live the life I never had the courage to let you live here. Open your heart, Kenneth. The world is bigger than Columbus and bigger than their expectations. Love fiercely when you find it. I am watching from somewhere better. Grandma." Kenneth's hands trembled. Tears blurred the ink. All these years he had carried the weight alone, smiling through Sunday dinners, dodging questions, swallowing the fear that one slip would cost him everything. And she had known. She had always known. He closed the suitcase, wiped his face, and carried it downstairs. The family was still arguing over a set of silver candlesticks. No one asked what was inside his inheritance. No one cared. But for the first time in his life, Kenneth felt something crack open inside him, a fragile, terrifying possibility that maybe the secret he had buried for 12 years was about to become the only thing that could save him. Back in his small Chicago apartment that night, Kenneth set the suitcase on the kitchen table and stared at the ticket like it might vanish if he blinked. The city lights flickered outside his window, cold and indifferent. He replayed the funeral in his head, the way Aunt Linda had looked at him with that half-pitying, half-suspicious glance when he arrived alone again. "Still no special someone?" she had asked. He had laughed it off, said work was busy. Lies upon lies. Now the letter burned in his pocket. He pulled it out and read it once more under the harsh overhead bulb. The words felt heavier each time. She had protected him even in death. The next morning his phone rang. It was his father. "Ken, we need to talk about the will. Linda thinks the suitcase might have something valuable inside. She wants to appraise it." Kenneth's stomach tightened. "It's just old clothes and papers, Dad. Grandma's note said it's mine." Richard sighed the long, disappointed sigh Kenneth knew too well. "Son, we're family. We share. Besides, you live in that tiny place in Chicago. What do you need with an old suitcase?" Kenneth ended the call quickly, heart hammering. He opened the suitcase again, took out the ticket, and booked the days off work before he could talk himself out of it. 2 weeks. 14 days to decide whether he was brave enough to step onto that plane and leave the version of himself everyone expected behind. The days blurred. He packed lightly, telling no one. At the office, his coworker Sarah noticed his distraction. "You okay? You look like you're planning to run away." He forced a smile. "Just family stuff after the funeral." She nodded sympathetically, but Kenneth wondered how she would react if she knew the real reason. That night he lay awake replaying every childhood memory where he had hidden who he was. The sleepovers where he pretended to like the same girls as the other boys. The prom date he chose because it was safer than saying no. The guilt sat heavy on his chest. Grandma's words echoed. "You are not broken." On the morning of the flight, Kenneth stood in the security line at O'Hare, suitcase rolling behind him like a lifeline. The ticket felt warm in his hand. He glanced at the families around him, parents holding children, couples laughing. No one knew he was about to chase a dead woman's blessing into a city he had only visited once on a school trip. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from cousin Mark. "Heard you're heading to New York. Bring back something good from that junk suitcase." Kenneth turned the phone off. As the plane lifted into the clouds, he pressed his forehead to the cool window and whispered the question that had haunted him since the attic. What if this suitcase hides the secret you've been hiding from everyone? The answer was already unfolding 30,000 feet above the Midwest. New York hit him like a wave the moment he stepped out of LaGuardia. Horns blared, crowds surged, and the humid August air wrapped around him like an embrace and a challenge at once. Kenneth dragged the suitcase through the terminal, heart racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. He had booked a cheap Airbnb in Brooklyn for a month, telling himself it was just a break, not a permanent escape. But deep down he knew better. The letter had planted a seed, and the city was fertile ground. He took the subway, clutching the handle of the suitcase like a talisman, and arrived at a narrow brownstone on a tree-lined street in Park Slope. The host left the key in a lockbox. Inside, the apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. He unpacked slowly. The old letters from Grandma went on the nightstand. One of them had a faded photograph tucked inside, a young Eleanor standing beside a man in a military uniform during World War II. On the back she had written, "Some loves we hide, some we set free." Kenneth traced the words with his thumb. He spent the first 3 days walking the city aimlessly, letting the noise drown out the voices in his head. Central Park at dusk, the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise, coffee shops where strangers smiled without asking questions. For the first time, he didn't feel watched. On the fourth day, he wandered into a small bookstore cafe on Fifth Avenue and ordered a latte. The barista behind the counter had warm brown eyes, dark hair that fell across his forehead, and a smile that made the room feel quieter. His name tag read Patrick. "First time in the city?" Patrick asked while steaming milk. Kenneth nodded. "Sort of. Family reasons brought me here." Patrick slid the cup across. Family reasons usually mean running from something or toward it. "Which one?" Kenneth laughed despite himself. "Both, I think." They talked for 20 minutes between customers. Patrick mentioned he had grown up in California, moved to New York after losing his mother 2 years ago, and now painted in his spare time. Something in the way he said losing his mother felt familiar, like shared grief. When Kenneth left, he carried Patrick's easy laugh with him all the way back to Brooklyn. That night, he opened the suitcase again and reread the letter. "Find your Patrick." He smiled at the coincidence of the name. Maybe Grandma had been wiser than any of them knew. The days turned into weeks. Kenneth and Patrick met again at the cafe, then for walks in Prospect Park. Patrick listened without judgment when Kenneth finally spoke about the funeral, the fighting family, the suitcase. "Sounds like your grandma was the only one who really saw you," Patrick said one evening as they sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the skyline gold. Kenneth's throat tightened. "She was. And now I'm here trying to figure out what that means." Patrick didn't push. He simply placed a hand on Kenneth's shoulder, the touch brief but steady. For the first time, Kenneth didn't flinch away. The friendship grew naturally, evenings filled with stories, laughter, and the slow realization that Patrick carried his own quiet scars. He had come out at 19, lost friends, rebuilt alone. "It gets better," Patrick told him. "But only if you let it." Kenneth started sketching again, inspired by the city lights and Patrick's easy presence. He sent a few designs to his Chicago boss and received enthusiastic replies. Life felt possible. Then the first crack appeared. His father called. Ken, Aunt Linda found out you're in New York. She's furious about the suitcase. Says it might have jewelry hidden inside. When are you coming back? Kenneth's stomach dropped. I'm staying a while, Dad. I need time. Richard's voice hardened. Time for what? You're not a kid anymore. Get your head straight and come home. Kenneth hung up, shaking. That night he told Patrick about the call, about the years of pretending. Patrick listened, eyes soft. You don't owe them your silence. The words landed like permission Kenneth had waited a lifetime to hear. By the end of the month, Kenneth had extended his Airbnb. He and Patrick spent Saturdays exploring museums, sharing street food, talking until the sky turned pink. One evening on the High Line, Patrick turned to him. You know, when you first walked into the cafe, I thought you looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. Now you look lighter. Kenneth met his gaze. That's because of you. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither had named yet. But Kenneth still held back, the old fear whispering that if he said it out loud, everything would shatter. Patrick seemed to understand. He didn't press. Instead, he invited Kenneth to his studio the next weekend. I want to show you something. The studio was a sunlit loft in Bushwick filled with canvases. Patrick's paintings were bold, full of color and emotion. One small piece caught Kenneth's eye, a portrait of two men standing on a bridge, backs to the viewer, hands almost touching. That's how I feel sometimes, Patrick said quietly. Close but still afraid to reach. Kenneth's heart pounded. He stepped closer. I know the feeling. Their eyes held. For the first time, Kenneth didn't look away. The secret he had guarded so fiercely felt less like a cage and more like a door beginning to open. Back in Columbus, the family group chat exploded. Aunt Linda posted photos of the empty attic, demanding to know what Kenneth had taken. That suitcase was worth something. He's hiding it. Uncle Bob chimed in. Typical. Always been the odd one out. Kenneth read the messages on the subway and felt the old shame rise. He almost deleted the chat. Instead, he turned off his phone and met Patrick for dinner at a small Italian place in the village. Over pasta and red wine, Patrick noticed the tension. Bad news from home. Kenneth nodded. They're fighting over the suitcase again. They think I stole something. Patrick reached across the table, fingers brushing Kenneth's. You stole nothing. You inherited freedom. Don't let them take it back. The touch lingered. Kenneth felt the warmth travel up his arm and settle in his chest. That night, walking home, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he didn't have to hide anymore. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Patrick invited him to an art opening where his latest piece was displayed. The gallery was crowded, lights soft, jazz playing low. Patrick's painting was larger now, the two men on the bridge facing each other, hands finally clasped. Kenneth stood in front of it, throat tight. Is that us? He asked quietly. Patrick smiled. It could be. If you want it to be. The words hung between them. Kenneth took a breath. I want it to be. Patrick's eyes lit up. They left the gallery early, walking through the rain without umbrellas, laughing like teenagers. At Patrick's door, Kenneth hesitated only a second before stepping inside. They talked until dawn, sharing the parts of themselves they had kept locked away. No rush, no pressure, just two men finally seeing each other clearly. For the first time, Kenneth slept without the weight of secrets pressing on his ribs. The family storm hit harder the following week. His father flew to New York unannounced. We need to talk, son. Face to face. They met at a diner near Kenneth's apartment. Richard looked older, tired. Your aunt is threatening legal action over that suitcase. She says Grandma was not in her right mind. And honestly, Ken, you've been acting strange. No calls, no visits. What's going on? Kenneth's hands shook around his coffee cup. He thought of Patrick waiting at the studio, of the painting, of the life he was building. Dad, I'm gay. I've always been gay. Grandma knew. She gave me the ticket so I could stop lying. The words left him in a rush. Richard stared, face paling. You're joking. Kenneth shook his head. I'm not. And I'm not coming home. Not like this. His father stood up, voice low and cold. Don't expect any support from us if you choose this path. He left without finishing his coffee. Kenneth sat alone, tears burning, but the relief was immediate and overwhelming. The secret was out. The cage was open. Patrick found him on a bench in the park that evening. Kenneth told him everything. Patrick listened, then pulled him into a hug. You did it. You chose yourself. They sat together as the city lights came on, hands intertwined. Kenneth felt the last pieces of his old life fall away. The suitcase had done its job. It had carried him across the country and into the truth. Now the real journey was beginning, one step at a time, with Patrick beside him. The months that followed tested everything. Kenneth's father stopped calling. Aunt Linda sent a formal letter demanding the suitcase be returned for appraisal. Kenneth ignored it. Instead, he focused on building something real. He found freelance work in the city, enough to stay. Patrick introduced him to a small circle of friends who welcomed him without question. They spent weekends painting together, cooking late-night dinners, talking about dreams. One evening, Patrick showed him a new canvas, a portrait of Kenneth standing at an airport with the suitcase at his feet, ticket in hand, face turned toward the future. "This is how I see you now," Patrick said. Kenneth kissed him then, soft and certain, the kind of kiss that felt like coming home. But family wounds run deep. Cousin Mark showed up in New York one weekend, drunk and angry. "You embarrassed us all. Dad says you're dead to him." Kenneth stood his ground. "I didn't choose to embarrass anyone. I chose to stop pretending." Mark left swinging insults. Patrick was there to hold Kenneth afterward, reminding him that chosen family could heal what blood refused to accept. Slowly, Kenneth began to believe it. He started volunteering at a local LGBTQ center, helping young people who reminded him of his younger self. The work gave him purpose. Patrick's love gave him strength. One crisp autumn day, they took the suitcase on a hike upstate. At the top of a hill overlooking the Hudson, Kenneth opened it one last time. He placed Grandma's letters inside, along with the now-expired ticket, and closed the lid. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind. Patrick slipped an arm around his waist. She'd be proud. They walked back down the trail hand in hand, the suitcase lighter than it had ever been. The following spring, Kenneth and Patrick moved into a small apartment together in Queens. The walls filled with Patrick's paintings and Kenneth's designs. They hosted quiet dinners, built traditions, and learned to navigate the ordinary joys and ordinary fights that come with real love. Kenneth still missed the idea of family sometimes, but the ache had softened. He had found something better, a life that fit. Years later, when a young man at the center asked him how he survived coming out, Kenneth smiled and told the story of the suitcase. Sometimes the thing everyone else throws away is the thing that saves you. Don't wait for permission. Take the ticket. Go. Patrick stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, the same steady presence that had walked every step with him. The secret was no longer hidden. It was simply who they were, out in the open, finally free. In reflecting on Kenneth's journey, the clearest lesson is that authenticity is never convenient, but it is always necessary. Family may disappoint us, society may judge us, but the moment we stop carrying secrets that were never ours to hide, we discover who we were meant to become. The suitcase and ticket were never about luggage or travel, they were about courage. If this story lingers with you, let it remind you that one honest step, however small, can rewrite an entire life. Choose yourself. The world and the right people will meet you there.